Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
Um,
morning.
my internet
Just
has
try.
been on and off all morning, so if I disappear, that's what happened. And I have no idea why, because the weather's fine.
What do you mean the weather's fine? It's a beautiful Washington morning. Out the window
Yeah,
there, I can see it.
This is
yeah,
just
nothing crazy that should be knocking down my internet, so I don't know what's happening.
do this.
And Rob has turned into a samurai again.
I'm having trouble with my video.
Where is Deanie? Where is Deanie?
Morning,
There is Deanie.
everybody.
Morning.
My
Sorry, I
coffee
have
is
to have
just,
a little bit of
I'm going to get my coffee. It's just in the microwave.
microwave coffee. That's the coffee. That's nothing to admit to. Sounds horrible.
My webcam isn't working, so I'm on my laptop.
What about
Good morning.
Good morning.
You had a visitor all last week.
Yeah, who was that?
Who was that guy?
Who was that mysterious masked
That's
stranger?
right. You guys had a good time together, I heard.
we need to figure that out.
Eric.
I'm trying to find the to make sure the sound here isn't too bad for you guys. It's so bizarre. Oh, here it is. Okay, it is on voice. Okay, fine, fine, fine. Yeah, I'm having this quite horrible Starbucks breakfast. It's not like what I experienced last night, I can tell you that much. Anyway, I woke
I
up
always
in the
have
middle of the
oatmeal
night.
at Starbucks.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they have it here. I woke up with a horrible cough cramp. You know, not one of those that just destroys your legs. So my morning was severely slowed down. But yeah, so Dini, it was wonderful to see you last night. Rob, it was wonderful to see you all last week. Andrew, I look forward to seeing you later today. Leon, I hope I will see you at some point again.
Andrew, you'll be happy to know that last night the guest brought me lots of chocolates, and I'm bringing a big bag of chocolate truffles to the lab for you to have
Oh,
as bride for your presence.
that is delightful. I will accept the bribe.
That's a good investment in Brian. So it's funny because all of you I've either seen recently or will see this week, except for Leon. But Leon is the only one here who has a physical timer on my body. What happened was when we had the future of texts last year, Leon and I were out the day before doing the night before doing a barbecue in the garden, and there was a flare up. So some of my hair got burnt. So I have this hair growing from the front of my head, showing exactly how long ago it is since I saw Leon. The most bizarre thing.
You're welcome.
Thank you, thank you.
And Andrew, I want to mention that I'm now on my new iMac desktop. The one I had for the longest time couldn't be updated enough to keep Slack or Zoom or Basecamp. So I was using my laptop for the longest time until I realized I really needed to get this iMac. So now I have a new iMac. And so I see you on big screen.
It means you can read what we put up on the screen. So cool.
Well, maybe so. I mean,
So, so cool.
I still need glasses. I do want to go on record saying that Alan wrote into our Slack channel. He wanted to know where the agenda was for Wednesday. And my response to him is that that's something that Frodo and I are working on today. So you'll see a Wednesday agenda sometime today after Frodo and I finish it. So
Yeah.
never fear, we've not forgotten the agenda.
yeah, it's going to be interesting trying to structure our life together. That's for sure. So I'm wondering if Randall and Fabian are coming. I just texted them. Just see here.
Good
Yeah, I haven't
morning.
heard anything back. Morning, Peter. How are
Hey,
you?
Peter.
Great. Having brunch, so I have the cam off again because you don't want to watch me eating. How was the Mac
True.
birthday party?
The Mac birthday party itself was really, really pleasant, and it really was Mac. It wasn't Apple. It was, and David Pogue was a fantastic moderator. He really, really got the best stories out of people. Guy Kawasaki was surprisingly and shockingly humble. He shouldn't have the chair. Joanna Hoffman in the audience should have the chair. So there was a bit of that. It was a bit of a love fest in a good sense. And the Apple executives didn't want to pay for it, didn't want to have anything to do with it, because Apple doesn't look backwards, as Dini and I have talked about. And when they heard how successful this was, they all wanted a front row seat. So all these bigwigs were there looking and then running out again afterwards. But it was good, wasn't it, Rob?
Yes. Was kept me awake past my bedtime.
Yes, we Brandel and Rob and I ended up at this probably the worst Chinese restaurant in Silicon Valley, but it was also the most fun probably. It
Was open.
Yeah, it was open. That going for it. So more kind of report from the Apple Day. It was lovely to see. So while things were getting ready, it was kind of a screensaver of old Apple pictures, Macintosh pictures, including screenshots, and the feeling of designing for that tiny space. Of course, Susan Kerr did a fantastic job, but it's also kind of comforting and cozy. That was interesting. And there were several things that came up during the event that I think may be relevant for us. Some of them I remember. Bill Atkinson, whom I get to spend the next 2 days with, and then probably in the States then.
Well,
1 second. Okay, so sorry, yeah, Fabian is busy, but he just wondered if there was something special. I said, of course there is. Every time. Anyway, one of the kind of nice little things in there was I really wanted to find out if Bill Atkinson was influenced by Doug Ted. And Dini said, as you've heard, of course he was. And she was absolutely right. Now I have it from the mouth of the horse. And he mentioned something else. He mentioned he went to see Doug when he was working secretly on the Mac. And Doug said, all this ease of use stuff is all well and fine, but do not make it impossible for people to become expert users. And that's when he invented for Mac the keyboard shortcuts. I thought that was an interesting historical tidbit and interesting for us. So yeah, that's it for my initial.
I have a question about the
report, I guess.
documentation. So your interview with Bill about that, and where you document that he actually says this thing, is going to be really important for Mark Anderson and I, because that will be the only documentation of this ever being said by him. So I don't know what you're planning to do with that interview, but I would love to have a copy of that video and put it on Vimeo for scholars.
There was no video. He
I thought that was
absolutely refused. He refused to be videoed. But this
you
he
follow
did
up-
say on the Mac. Yeah,
could you follow
yes.
up?
First,
Could you? Okay, I'll stop.
sorry. Despite being
He's
close to you
cautious.
now, the lag was a bit weird. Must be the Starbucks Wi-Fi. This was said during the 40th anniversary party, so there may very well be a recording of the live story. So that's one thing. And I have been in touch with him via text because he wanted some photographs I took of him. So if we can't get the live stream, then I will absolutely text him to ask him to put it back in writing. Otherwise, I can probably write it in a book as a report from meeting him, just an interview report.
It won't be good unless he says it. Scholars can't, the provenance won't be enough for citation. So could you send him an email? Because emails count, right? It's a document.
He doesn't.
Could you
He
send?
doesn't reply to emails. He's a very difficult person.
He's
But why not?
cautious.
But if I write it in one of our books, as in a meeting where Rob and I, no,
It's hearsay.
come on, no,
I mean, just
No.
from a scholarly standpoint, it's hearsay. Unless-
it's not hearsay. It's reporting.
You're
So
reporting
only
on something.
primary
you can't-
sources count.
It's not a hard source. It's not hard evidence. You can cite him. I mean, you could say that, but people would not ever be able to I mean, this is a scholarship issue, right? This is what scholars argue about. So the provenance would not be strong enough to support a counter argument. Somebody else could say, well, I talked to him and he said something different, and we can't verify their comments. So I'm still going to be working off the fact that I'm guessing that he was influenced by the zeitgeist of the period.
So I found the live stream. I'll put it in Slack. And this is where he said it in public. So we can find out exactly when he said it. But yeah, it was very, very frustrating. I brought my nice little video camera and everything, and he's just, because he's interested in consciousness, and that includes alternative pharmaceuticals, let's say, he absolutely didn't want anything recorded in case he ended up saying something that could be taken out of context and all of that stuff. So yeah, not the best. I'm just putting it in Slack now. Boom, there it is. Right, so yesterday, Deanie, oh, hi, Mark. I see you there. Deanie was very kind to host me as a welcome dinner, and she had some amazing people from the computer games industry who clearly understand a lot of the space we're in, not just because it's XR related, but also humans, cognition, interactions, all that good stuff. They're really kind of amazing. I hope we will continue dialogue with them. And I hope all of you can come up to Washington for the next Future of Text in November. It's quite a nice place. It looks a bit like Norway. Oh, was that someone screaming, yay? I will definitely be there. Sorry, the line got a bit cut. Is that what I all heard you say? Well, Rob's going to be here. He doesn't have an option. Andrew, Deanie. The rest of you, what's the chance you're coming to America by the end of the year? Are you speakers off? You can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, cool. All right, Leon, first, any chance you'll be joining us?
Possibly no. I have some other trips coming up, but in spirit I will be there, and I guess you will be updating, or I can follow everything on Slack, right? As well. But yeah,
probably
short
not.
answer, no.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I hope that'll change, and we can maybe stay in the same bed and breakfast. It's really cool. It's like an Agatha Christie murder house. Fantastic. I read up the world there. But I think
You'd
this
have to
one will
fight-
actually be more.
You have to fight Rob for the Hemingway room.
Uh-oh,
Yes.
wait a minute. Thought he wasn't going to stay there.
He's in the Hemingway room. And you're
No,
I'm
out.
very much.
not next time.
No,
My room.
That's fair enough. But yeah, I'm not sure how hybrid the next one is going to be. Hybrid seems to be a bit difficult, but of course, at least to attend. And of course, for you guys who've been here hardcore, of course, we'll make it work. But we're not going to really advertise it as being hybrid. Going next on my screen, Mark, what's the chance you're flying across?
When? Sorry.
November,
I mean-
end of November.
I don't know. I mean, realistically, for me, it's really funding more than anything else, because now I'm basically completely unfunded. I've less stack. I mean, otherwise, in terms of willingness to come, no, absolutely. I don't think I'm constrained in November off the top of my head.
I have some news for you, Mark.
Yeah.
I was talking to Klaus, we're working on that summer school, the Hypertext summer school. And it looks like we got funding for 7 graduate students to be funded for the summer school.
Mhm.
One of the things that I'm doing now is looking for funding for faculty. And faculty is defined in the first year as people who speak in the classes, right? And you're down to speak in the class, right?
Okay.
So I'm looking for funding for you for the Hypertext conference, which means that if we need funding for Future of Text, that's only one funding we have to look for instead of 2. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Understood. Right. So I also need to probably mental note to self to extend my calendar planning, because if I do come, the summer school's before the conference. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 2 days before the conference.
Yeah. No, that I mean that's not problematic. It's just sort of note to self. Yeah.
Yeah, and but he'll talk to you more about he's presenting on Friday to the group. And and we'll know more about the structure once that's been finally approved. But it looks like we got 7 seats funded, which means we can roll and make plans. So but you're down for, I chose you as the person talking about I don't know, hypertext proceedings.
Yes. I've already done sort of basically 1.5 interviews today on people wanting. So I've just been talking to the people who are trying to look at the marketing of Minter. That was actually very, very interesting. I don't think it's too much of an aside here, in that they said, well, we spoke to the programmers and they told us lots of things we didn't understand, but we still don't know what the app does. Which is interesting. So we actually had an interesting conversation about how things might be used. It's really interesting too about how how fixed people are about having yet more comment systems, as if this is going to make us understand one another any better. Human agreement, or rather disagreement, just doesn't fit into technical systems. Having a way to thread what we think and what we mean is actually much more productive, which is actually really interesting in the system. So the same technical underpinnings can come to a much richer human output, but probably don't ask the programmers to write the outer documentation.
I've seen a work of hypertext literature in which in the comment section in the code, 2 computer programmers are arguing over the text, over the the HTML in the code in the comment sections. I'm also presenting a work of Elit Art on Tuesday, in which Emily Short, it's an interactive fiction piece in which the person is constantly editing her work before she sends it out, but you have traces of the original in the text, so you can see her struggling with with her text, and there's like versions and versions and versions before she sends out the final version, right? So those kinds of things are really interesting.
I should add, for the record, for anyone watching this later, please don't take my earlier comments as being disparaging about the work of programming. I have a tremendous respect for it, partly because I know enough to know that I'll never do it well. So I have a respect for the art. It's just interesting to reflect on how the working perspective, though, can make it difficult. Where you're sat sometimes makes it difficult to have the perspective you need to describe something.
So
So I
Fraga,
just got an email back from, I got an email back from my opticians right now. And the reason I'm mentioning that is for the Vision Pro, if you have glasses, you have to have optical inserts. If you don't order them at the same time as you order the Vision Pro, you may very well need a different light seal, which is another $200. It's absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, my optician in England, because I explained why I needed him to rush a few things, he is so excited now to learn about the optics of the Vision Pro.
Mm.
It's kind of fun to have a dialogue with someone quite literally on the other side of things. So we'll see if anything useful comes out of that.
I'm surprised, Minority Report style, they just don't, when you go in the Apple store, just issue you with a new pair of eyes. I mean, changing everything else.
I wonder what happens
that's,
with
that's
bifocals, though.
what, Peter?
but
What happens with bifocals when you're getting inserts? Do you have them for the distant prescription, the close prescription, or do you get bifocals for inside of the headsets? Or do we know any bifocal users who've used headsets to report experiences?
yeah, that's me.
I was using,
I'm a trifocal
I was using
user.
tricocals. I was using yeah. I was using the Tri for my glasses until I lost them. And now I just buy over the counter two point level glasses. But I prefer the Tris so I can look up, down, and out.
It will be your distance prescription. I checked that with the optician in Stanford. It's an
That's
interesting thing.
interesting.
So yesterday, yeah, I mean, when I use the Quest, if I use my reading glasses, it's blurry, the ones I'm using now. If I use my regular far distance glasses, it's fine, even though these are split. So over dinner yesterday, there were many, many interesting things. And one direction, by the way, Adam, you are here, right? Can you give us a signal? Because I think this is kind of Adam interest. Because we were trying to explain to these guys who are very, oh, cool, perfect signal. You know, have a lot of thoughts in this area. One of the things that might be interesting is because we talked a little bit about disabilities and how disabilities in one area may be an ability in another area and so on. One of the things that could be interesting is to start with eye tracking. So the system knows exactly what you're reading. It knows exactly what chunks, and it knows exactly what you skip. It would then be able to say things like, you missed this bit, this is actually important. Or the system's AI will have a better understanding of what you got out of the document when you're done. I'm not saying it's necessarily a topic to discuss now, but it's, in a sense, the opposite of interactivity. It's you do your normal passive thing, but there are things that can make that different, just to move the discussion into different fields. I think it was Adam who built the system where the text is locked to your head when you want it to be. So you can lie back and the text is above you, which can be very nice. And then, of course, we get into the idea of text moving automatically, scrolling automatically. Well, that could be very interesting, of course, with precision eye tracking, because if you just look to the side, oh, you got moved around the screen. That's great. Anyway, if you look to the side, it may slow down or stop. So you have, you know, purely visual means of reading. Yes, these types of things are maybe fun to look into. I'm conscious of today not doing Sloan correctly. So if anyone has all over the map things, that's great.
Actually, one thing I noticed that you were talking about using the headsets and I think so I'm now at about +3, so I've got sort of standard degraded sort of reading, you know, age-related degraded reading ability, but otherwise my eyesight's fine. And these are quasi-varifocals. That's just very slight varifocals used for a desk. Anyway, so when I use the Oculus, I actually find that I can normally just about get it to focus. Sorry. Yes, the two. Not the. Yeah. and but oddly, no matter how hard I get the straps, if I hold the eyepiece to my face, it's in focus. The moment I let go, it's all slightly out. There's something about the way it sits, and it doesn't matter how you do it, which is frustrating because when it's in focus, it's really good. When it's out of focus, it's extremely tiring.
Yeah, that's exactly why the Apple is so hardcore on getting all the bits. It's a three-piece thing, so to speak.
Well, it also makes sense about, you know, I know there's all sorts of sort of side chat about the various headsets and whether you have the battery on, you know, about, you know, how awful it is to have battery not detached, but actually not having extra weight, because it's certainly the case with the Quest that it just constantly wants to slide down because obviously there's all that weight hanging in a place where you don't normally put weight.
Yeah, the reviews say that compared to the 2, if you have the Quest 2 with the battery at the back, it's slightly heavier, but it's better balanced. The only negative thing I keep reading about the Vision is that it is too front-loaded.
Well, I have the battery
So
pack,
that's-
so I would agree. I think it's just that the sheer amount of, I don't know quite what it is. It's something to do, I think, with the angle that it sits to the face that the straps just don't. So I've got the one with a battery, a back band, and a top band. It doesn't matter what I do. The only way, if I put my hand against it, I could hold it. But then, of course, I want to use my hand for other stuff. So that kind of reduces its utility.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone will probably make a external battery pack mount hang off the back of your head to help balance the Apple Vision Pro. I could see that. You know, just sort of a little band around your head,
Absolutely.
using the weight of the battery to help even out the distribution. I'm sure that'll be a third-party product.
I love the way you have to go and have it sort of fitted. Is this the modern equivalent of going to your tailor, going to have your VR headset fitted?
You have it fitted with an iPhone. So when I ordered it, it said,
Yeah.
now go to your nearest phone, scan this thing, and then you have to do this. You know. And embarrassingly enough, it looks like Adam and I have the same sized and shaped head. I don't know how to deal with that.
No, I mean, I
Adam, have you
understand.
booked? Have you
I'm not
booked?
disparaging.
Yeah, I know. At your flight to London?
Who's going to London?
I'm hoping Adam will come one day.
Oh, right.
My Vision Pro is being delivered to Dini's on Saturday. If it arrives on time, fine. If not, it's going to be a lot of money on shipping. And then all of you in Europe, come over and play with it. Come to London. What an excuse, huh?
When is that? When?
I'm going to have, it's all Adam's comment. Let me just look here on the internet webs. Yeah, it's supposed to arrive Friday the 2nd, this Friday. And I leave early Saturday the 3rd. So, yeah.
Fred, how did your meeting with about Hypercard go? I mean, if you talked about it before I arrived, I can watch it on the sort of a video.
I'll try to give okay, it was absolute hell, is what it was. And it really made me question life, the universe, and everything. So it was great to listen to Bill and all the guys on the Wednesday. The link is in Slack. You can all watch it if you want to. I highly recommend it. Lots of tidbits. But as Bruce Porn points out, not all of it is true. Some of it is misremembered. So just keep that in mind. And Dini, I understand your academic integrity with that kind of a source. Because Bruce said certain people didn't do certain things. But again, that's also hearsay. Anyway, so then the next day we were at Apple campus and outside in the gift shop, Rob and Bruce and me and Brandel for a while. Turned out that Bill was there too. Bruce went up, talked to him, and joined us for what, an hour or so, Rob? You would say? Something like that, yeah. So we were sitting, chatting all kinds of things, and that's when he was very much about consciousness, and he didn't want to be recorded because of all the illegal drugs he has to test, even though there's safe limits, blah, blah, blah. He was holding up the T-shirt he bought that had Mac paint on it, and, you know, fun and relatively stuff. And the next day, Rob and I and Bruce go to Bill Atkinson's home, up in the hills, large house, view over a pond, large duck pond. Very, very nice. Not very well kept, which is psychologically interesting considering he is a perfectionist. The thing he did say about software is polish, 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 user test, polish, polish, polish. That was basically his one advice, which is important advice considering what he's done. He then wanted to watch his previous ducks, which was cute. And then we went downstairs for at least an hour on him showing how he took the pictures of precious stones. As a photographer, I found that mostly interesting. And here's the book that we got. It's absolutely beautifully done. And then he started the discussion on consciousness, which could have been interesting, except it took all the time. And then Bruce talked a little bit about his experiences, and then it was time to go. So first of all, there wasn't actual real time. But he really did poo-poo the whole notion of doing something in hypercloud level tech or even XR today. To him, it's all going to be telepathy and all of that stuff. And there was one thing that I found really blaming and awful, and that is this notion, that first of all, the cute notion that consciousness is one thing. We all have the same consciousness. Our brains are radio receivers. Fair enough. Then there's this other thing about reincarnation, and that we will have a preview of the life we're going to have, because Silicon Valley types are all about learning. You got it. You know, I was a shit capitalist this life, his words. Now I want to know what it's like to be a poor person, to be humble. Learning, very much about the self. So I choose a life that's going to be that. I get a preview. I was just thinking, currently in the world with starvation and wars, how many people said, I want to be one of 10,000 children to be blown to bits after seeing my parents killed when I'm 5? You know, it's such an absolution of responsibility to have that perspective, because we have chosen it before we went into it, rather than there are things in the world we really need to deal with it. So that was, Dini's talked to me about this quite a bit, and very nicely put my head a little bit back together. But I do find that perspective quite scary. And it also turns out that these guys, including my very, very old friend Bruce, they really cannot take a difficult discussion. So if there's politics or something, if people disagree, and you know, maybe we get a bit excited from it, it's like, come on, what's going on, or whatever. That's too much for them. So why are they not focusing on building systems through which we can have these discussions? If we can't have a robust, passionate discussion, we are only going to be preaching to the choir. So all that stuff about climate change and everything else becomes just wishy-washy talk. Well, that was that, really. Anybody
as
can
I was
have a
saying,
nice, easy discussion. Sorry, Dini, please.
I was going to say, what's interesting is that there's a really wonderful book done by the Dyson son. George Dyson did it. So you know Esther's work, you know his father's work, but this book is called Silicon's Second Nature. No, it wasn't Dyson, it was another person, but it's called Silicon's Second Nature. And the book came out, I think, in the mid 90s. And what this guy did is he did an anthropological study of the scientists working in New Mexico on artificial life. Remember the AL movement back in that period? He embedded himself with this group of scientists and watched them work on artificial life. And the book documents his experience. And what he comes away saying is that when you get a group of people that are sequestered in a space and only work together, reading each other's works, focusing on their lab work, thinking about what they're doing, they don't really understand the world at large, and the things that become incredibly intellectually incestuous. And so they're not getting outside input. They're not experiencing what other people experience. And it becomes a very dangerous environment for people that are creating life environments, life objects, right? And it's a frightening book, but it's an extremely academic book, and I highly recommend you look at it. It's a quick read. I see this also in university administration, just to bring it up to our local experiences. Administrators, go from a faculty position into administration, and then they get in administration and they're so sucked into their daily activities, they have forgotten what it's like to be in a classroom. So for example, when we're going through the pandemic and the faculty were having to teach online via Zoom, many of the, in fact, I would say all the administrators on my campus, none of them had taught for years. None had ever taught online. None had ever taught during a pandemic, right? And they were making policy for faculty that just had no basis in reality, right? And affecting the teaching experience, affecting the learning experience, affecting the emotional, spiritual experience of the faculty and students. And then when it was all over, they couldn't understand why things didn't go well, why students really weren't learning, why faculty are in bad, emotional states, were all in pretty bad morale. But we kept going to them with suggestions, and they would say, no, we know better. I'm the vice president of academic affairs. So I think the lesson to learn from this, and why I think it's important that Frode brings it up, is that we are asked by Sloan not to be that, right? We have promised in our grant to reach out and bring in other people that are not necessarily like us. And by like us, I mean all of you that have been part of Future of Text for a year or 2 years or 3 years or 10 years. It's important that we bring in these outside folks. And last night's dinner, I brought in people that are not part of us. They're part of the creative tech community, but they're in Vancouver, Washington. Some are building games, some are building AI. They're not intellectuals, Mark. They're not academics at all. But they're much more homespun, right? And this is what we need to be looking at as we move through the next 2 years of our grant, is bringing in people that have a different perspective, that can take us out of our laboratory community and think more largely about the problems we're trying to solve. That's why Sloan gave us the money.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is why it is so useful that we are doing only WebXR, because it's just so much more easy to share with people. Anybody who has a headset, we give them a link, they can see what we do. It's not why we chose WebXR, of course, but I think that's going to be brilliant. And, having had this thing knocked over the head by Bill Atkinson so long, obviously the man's successful, so some of it we can learn from, and the thing is test with a wider audience. Wider audience within, two different things. Obviously test within a wider audience within academics primarily, that's our target user group, but get perspectives from further afield. Art, please.
Just thinking, prompted by sort of Dean's comment, that I think the interesting sort of challenge in the perspective things is to actually capture the perspective as discrete from the person who's bringing the perspective to you, because I can think all too often it's terribly easy to get the two mixed up, and actually it's sort of often the perspective that's more important than the person who's bringing the message. In other words, you don't want to get lost in whether you like the person or you agree with them or that sort of thing. What's really fascinating is just that you suddenly say, oh right, so there's a whole different viewpoint on this, but sort of the process of abstracting that and indeed finding somewhere to park it and store it without bending it out of shape is an interesting challenge.
Absolutely.
The book, in this book, it's wonderful because these people are all these are white male scientists, mostly American, and they're developing these artificial life environments. And one guy screams out, "I'm God! I'm making life! I'm God! I'm God!" So they have this real. As he walked away from this, he said they have a real God identity, that they're creating something, that they're above human beings. The kind of environment they built was one in which they were at the top of the pecking order of the universe. I mean, it's really goofy. It's just, and these are this is, all the lab notes that he has and everything. It's just fascinating. Here it is right here, page 84. I feel like God. In fact, I am God to the universe I create. I am outside of the time space in which those entities are embedded. I sustain their physics through the use of computer. I look like I am an omniscient to the entities with that physics and so on, quote unquote, from one guy. Anyway, worth reading.
Yeah, absolutely. Leon, sorry, my feet got stuck. Leon, please.
Yeah, I was so this last comment about I am God, and combined with Freud's conversation, which yeah, about reincarnation, etc. It reminded me a bit of how important it is that we keep ourselves surrounded by people who are balanced. So you don't want to be around people who are only grown up. You also don't want to be around people who are who've only woken up. You want to be around people who are both grown up and woken up, because if they're only woken up, then they feel like God, or they feel above other people. They feel like they have some kind of superiority. If they're only grown up, then there's another superiority problem where their knowledge is sort of superior. And yeah, I think if there is a sort of balance there, and Freud as a complement, or I think also everybody in this group actually, I think qualifies as sort of yeah, being willing to explore a completely different belief systems or different ways of thinking about it, and also open to the fact that we could be completely wrong about things, and that the best practices were instead maybe just a temporary tool, but maybe they weren't the best practice, and there is another practice which we're not seeing. So yeah, that's my my few cents.
I tend to think teaching
Yeah,
is like
to
a
try to-
really good.
Yes.
I tend to think teaching is a really good experience
Sure.
because it surrounds you
Thank
with
you.
lots of people.
Sorry, interruptions at Starbucks.
Never mind. It's okay.
No, Dini, someone just handed me a thing, so I just have to say thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, it's just I think teaching is great to be around young people, different experiences, different worldviews. I mean, what the young people are going through today is not exactly what I went through as a young person, so it's good to have that reminded. I also would love to be around people that are not the same political persuasion as I am. I like to hear their views. I get a lot of, I visit, different other political blogs and news sources so I can get a sense of what other people are thinking and why. I don't know, I don't agree with them all, but at least it lets me understand why maybe I'm not seeing things the way they see things, right? So I think it's important. It also helps you sharpen your own perspective and rethink your own moralities, right? So. Seems awfully quiet today.
Yeah, it seems like both Mark and Freud left. Oh, Freud's back.
No.
Mark is also back.
I was just going to.
I was listening.
It was sort of further to my comment that sort of following from Dini's thing about, I think it was Dini saying about people working off in abstraction. I was really amazed when I was reading sort of the Bardini book on the Augment team, and how the thing I really didn't see coming in that is that they wandered off to do encounter therapy, which proved to be anything but helpful to their general sanity and the life of the team. In fact, as far as I can see, it sort of basically was the end of the whole thing. But again, why on earth a group of people doing what they were actually doing would need anything of that type? But I presume it comes from this thing. If you spend a lot of time locked in, I don't know, it's necessarily harmful. I mean, having spent many years bouncing around in a tin box at sea, which definitely ticks most of the boxes about being shut away from other people, it definitely cuts you off, obviously, from the zeitgeist and things. But I guess I suppose there was enough structure in my former line of work that to maybe hold some of the craziness at bay.
One of the things that's come up recently is what are we trying to augment, right? It may very well be to deal with these kinds of discussions and to deal with the difference and all of that stuff. Unfortunately for the Sloan, fortunately and unfortunately for the Sloan, it's very, very clear what we're trying to augment. But even with the question of, excuse me, reading, as Dini brought up last time, there are at least a few different kinds of acknowledged types of reading, even when you're reading academic. So I look forward to experimenting with that. One thing that happened to me on the airplane, yesterday was the first day that the plane, you know, the Boeing plane with the window turned into a convertible, right? That was put into service again yesterday. So when I arrived at the airport nice and early, they said that we were delayed because they couldn't get the plane out of the hangar, which sounded a bit stupid. And I said, what? Jokingly in a pleasant way, I said, what is it? You don't have trucks? Are the wings too big? What's going on? So then after a few hours, the captain was also waiting, said this about being the first plane. This is the first day those planes can be used again, so they're all rushing. Anyway, I have no idea what told you that. Sorry. Point of the story, walking around the airport, being really frustrated and bored a little bit, and everything was good. So on the flight, what I was thinking about is the Vision Pro, the main interaction is, of course, quite patronizing. You sit on a sofa and you twiddle your fingers. You know, that's just not how we want to really interact with our work. That's how we consume, right? So, you know, the question of how we do all of this, and we know that we're going to be holding things, moving it and scaling, that's going to be great. But I'd really like to hear if you guys agree with the notion that physical controls, even when reading, will remain useful. I'm thinking about how, at least in the short term, keyboards will be useful even when reading. Meaning that Bill Atkinson having reminded me of keyboard shortcuts. I can imagine we're in an exile environment, we have our things, and we can still have access to a physical keyboard so we can do all kinds of things there to change the views rather than have to do Tom Cruise getting heavy arms. But yes, Leon, please take over.
And just to dig in a little deeper, are you saying that in contrast to certain people saying that, yeah, the keyboard is of no use in VR, let's forget about it and let's completely rethink everything, are you saying that maybe we shouldn't throw away the baby with the bathtub or the bathwater, something like that, that there is perhaps some useful muscle memory which is already sort of inside the bodies using the software, that we should actually consider that interface as an important one as well? And then the question, what about these game joysticks or something, which a lot of gamers are using? How does that compare with what you're talking about?
To answer that, this is not a game, but that doesn't mean that there aren't aspects of this are game. When I say that is because joysticks were designed for game-like interaction. You know, there's a very different intent around these different tools. So in general, I think we should try to be really, really careful, make useful things, and at the same time, in parallel, try all kinds of crazy stuff using different kinds of controllers. I'll show you something after Peter. That was your cue, Peter.
Oh, okay. One thought that occurs to me is that rather than having a traditional keyboard, since we're thinking about working in VR environments, did we ever consider a Predator style arm gauntlet so that you could have the keyboard, but it would be a panel strapped to your forearm, you could move around the 3D space, hands-free to gesture, but you'd always have the keyboard right there on your arm, even if you're walking around. Also, Disney Research just released a new concept called hollow tiles, and apparently they used ultrasonic vibration of tiles to selectively control the friction coefficient of small individual floor tile segments, allowing the system to vibrate and move someone around so they can be walking within a short area. And you could also have multiple people on a hollow tile floor being moved and oriented in different directions so they could be right next to each other. You could be walking east, I could be walking west. We'd both actually be standing next to each other in the system. In the virtual world, we could be anywhere relative to each other. And the system very slowly and subtly can reorient people or even move static prop objects around relative to actual live actors.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah,
something to
yeah.
have a look for.
This is very well publicized. It turns out yesterday over dinner, the people there say, yeah, they've been using those systems for at least 5 years. So why it's suddenly getting publicized is interesting. But those are cool things. When it comes to the gauntlet, we already have that. Fabienne has built that. Not a physical gauntlet, but when you are in your headset anyway, to look at your arm and you have different operations there is very useful, I think. But there is going to be very, very interesting to experiment with having things in the air and then letting your fingers rest and have the muscle memory plus visually you will see the keyboard. You will have that as well, different combinations. Yeah, Mark.
I'm just thinking, yeah, I mean, a useful thing in looking at some of these affordances is keeping hold of the context and saying, is this fixing something broken old? Is it adding a link to the new? In other words, are we using this thing? So, for instance, reusing a gaming control because it's something we have and we know how to use. Is it? You know, what is it fixing? Is it fixing something going forward, or is it bringing something going past? And again, these are not negative judgments. It's just in a sense of, am I using this because I know how to use it and I have it, and it solves me fixing something else. But the interesting thing is when that unintentionally shields us from looking at a better and newer affordance for dealing with the same thing, that perhaps doesn't then require us to hold on to an old technology that we don't need, or an old system. Amanda, in saying that, I'm not suggesting I have particular answers, but it's just something came out of actually a recent away meet I've been on the last couple of days, and listening to how people were talking about the technology. And when it sat in the sides, what I could see was there was a lot of people effectively self-justifying use of something they didn't really need, but it was easier using that than actually looking at the problem in front of them.
So you think of things like Moore's Law, right? The most convenient sometimes is what people want. In America, it's the cheapest, fastest, cheapest. It depends on the culture, right? I don't think that's so true in other parts of the world. But in my own experience working with technology, it's because it makes things not easier, but you can cover more territory better. I used the analogy a long time ago in this group when I talked about the use of email and how the young folks were, young people at the time like me going into academia were using email and as graduate students, and we got to our university and email was not common, right? And it was Pine or Elm, some really crappy VMS system. But we were using it. So the young people were using it among each other. We got our settings set, we could talk. And the older faculty who were anti-email and still use their phones and memos, right, paper memos, wanted to know why we were having these conversations without them. And we put together a little listserv and we're inviting people to come join us. And, some older faculty got interested and began joining our listserv and began disseminating information among ourselves. And the anti-tech group, the 3 women that were anti-tech, began to realize they were being left out. And at that moment, they got into email, right? And they realized how important email was and how quickly they can disseminate information. So I think it's a combination of things, Mark. It's the ability to do something quicker, faster. It's also feeling like you're left out. I mean, I know people that join social media, not because they like social media, but they realize their family members we're all having conversations about the next family retreat, and they weren't part of the conversation and they wanted to help plan. So I think sometimes people come kicking and screaming into the environments. Now, in terms of VR, I don't think it's quite necessary right now to use it. I mean, there's no real impetus to do it, which is why it's important for us to get on this now. I think that's another reason why Sloan gave us the money. Before it becomes a mainstreamed experience with all the butterflies pinned to the board, we're thinking ahead of time. We're foreseeing how this could be used and trying to settle some of the problems that academics will face when they're trying to do certain tasks. So I think you're right. There's nothing that we have to do with this right now. I mean, there's no real need for it. $3,500. What the hell? I mean, that's more than, I mean, travel budgets for most universities now for faculty is $1,500, right? Where are they going to get the other 2,000? And, you know, so I guess I'm kind of weaving around the issue, and the answer is there is no need for it right now. That's why we're doing this, because we're going to anticipate the need, and we have to figure out what those needs are and then answer that question. So we're getting the cart in front of the horse purposefully. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes. How are we going to input text?
Yeah, I think I see your hand there, Leon, but just briefly, I think, Mark, you were perhaps referring more to things like the keyboard or so on in there, plus as a general thing. And my
Yeah.
really quick answer to this is we should be really boring. Actually, Leon, is it okay if I take a minute? Okay, thank you. If I now had the money for my own software, what I would do is port Author to Native Vision. And the one thing I would do, instead of having a rectangular window like that, have the window be the size of the document. So if it's a really long thesis, for instance, it can go maybe through the ceiling and through the floor, because in my own editing, the scrolling thing is so annoying. So that is the most mundane, plain thing, normal keyboard with a huge window. That might be one way to go. But of course, we also want to go to hugely new worlds. So my comment to you, Mark, would be both. I'm sure you
Sure.
agree, but you're nodding. Leon, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize what Deanie also said, that this is actually very important, this conversation, because I've noticed that Meta and Quest, they are also struggling with this issue, and they have a certain baggage or legacy which they have to deal with first, and we don't, basically. And just to give you an example, if you load up the First Hands application in the Quest, it's a sort of demonstration for how to use your hands in VR. Then you will see that in the beginning they will ask you, oh, you need your controllers, grab your controllers now, which is a bit weird. I mean, it's a hand demo, right? So you pick your controllers and you need to use them to sort of set up some kind of space or area. And if you think about it, this is probably a legacy thing. This sort of like drawing the space was completely implemented when there was no hand tracking. So this is sort of a legacy issue. And then further, the moment if you see a keyboard, you cannot tap the keys of the virtual keyboard. No, you have to sort of like, you will see some sort of mouse pointer, and you have to, it's not really what you would expect from a hand tracking. And so I think they are with one leg into a controller legacy world, and with the other leg, they want to try some new stuff. And I'm putting a link in the Slack chat of a WebXR demo, where just with a few, not even so much code, you can just really use your hands on some, but you can just, point your finger and push a button or grab a slider. And this is actually what I expected from this first-hand demonstration. Even though it's a very impressive demonstration, it looks beautiful. Sorry, I'm now talking about the Oculus first-hand demo, but this simple WebXR hand tracking demo, it looks okay. It's just a few cubes, but it does allow you to, you know, meet your expectations concerning hand tracking. That you could easily create a keyboard where you can just type, and then you would basically still use your muscle memory, which you sort of learned when you use normal keyboards. Leon out.
That's very interesting, Leon. And I think there's a lot, I mean, there's a lot of legacy activities that happen. And even with email, when I switched from Pine and Elms into the Apple email, I mean, those are called breadcrumbs, right? It's a way to get people go from point A to point B. And we have to have those redundancies in place until we can kind of eliminate it. We were so used to the old-fashioned VMS email where we had to use your keys to move around. We couldn't use a cursor at all, right? With the Pine email. When we moved into the Apple, it took I mean, it was a shock because we really didn't have that kind of GUI interface yet, right? And so it's much better to have these kind of, like it's like having the prehensile tailbones in our bodies. We still have a semblance of a tail on the human body, right? It hasn't quite gone away. It's still there. It's a memory of what we used to be. So I think that's part of it. I mean, it's an anthropological, I don't know, leftover necessity for how things work. Eventually, we don't need tutorials anymore. I mean, one good example of that is electronic literature. We used to have a manual to come with the work to tell us how to put the damn, floppy disk into the drive, right? And Rob remembers this. First you take this out of the package, then you put it in the computer, and then you see, and now we don't even think about it. First, we don't have floppy disks, but even after before floppy disks went away, we really didn't need those manuals anymore. But Mark Bernstein paid a lot of money for 14 pages of telling us how to use, Michael Joyce's Afternoon Story. And it's really quite amusing how we make those. I think there's a study that needs to be done on how we are able to make this transfer of information and move through the technologies to the next place, right? That'd be very helpful for our project, I think. I'll stop.
I think it's Mark, Rob, Peter. Sounds like a nursery rhyme.
Okay, I was thinking it. What I was going to make was about this, in a sense, us things like AR and XR and what we're augmenting. And I was thinking, prompted by Dean's comment of the breadcrumb trails, part of what we're doing is removing things. So where we have to say, see below in paragraph 14, table 2, we shouldn't need that now. Not this instant, but the trajectory we're going towards, I think, is such that what we might call a document in this emergent space wouldn't need so much of that scaffolding, because effectively it might effectively sort of self-deconstruct for us, so that all these relationships that we are actually having to shim in by use of literal text. In other words, there's stuff we have to write at the moment to provide these breadcrumbs that we won't need. And it's easy to overlook that as being an augmentation, because just because it's removing something, we might think we've done nothing. But actually, removing stuff that we no longer need, I think, is tremendously powerful, because it allows us to give greater presence to the things that matter. Rob.
Hang on a second, just on Mark's point there. If it's not written through text, what is the mechanism through which it will be encoded what these things that you described are?
Well, I mean, if you were reading it still on a literal paper page, you would need this. But if you had a document where for instance, the graphs weren't in fact pictures of a graph, they were actually effectively a dynamic portal onto the data underneath, for the sake of argument. Or that by looking or touching a part of the document, the text that would say go see figure 16 on page 42 is no longer required, because actually the affordance would take you right there, or it would bring it, say, beside the thing you're reading. These are things that we can do in an augmented space because we now have the control. We're stepping outside the limitations of literal or imagined paper print. So a lot of things we're doing at the moment are, understandably, within cultural legacy we have, because that's how you would do it. And our first step was to make things that we would make literally on pieces of paper and do them virtually on a screen. We're getting to the point now where we don't have the requirement of the past form. It doesn't, that doesn't devalue the past form.
Mark,
But what it does disconnect
we're
is,
also we're all sold on that, absolutely, completely. But I'm just wondering what you mean by not having to write it out. So how would the system know what things it should do if it isn't written somehow?
well,
What
I
do you mean
would
by that?
imagine, without getting down a rabbit hole, it would involve the tools that we don't yet have. So when you construct something, you would just link up the relevant parts of it. So you wouldn't be writing on a sheet of vellum with your fountain pen. You would actually be using a tool that will be assembling parts in a different way. Now, there's lots in a way I don't like about that. I quite like it. I quite like writing in the old sense, but nonetheless, I'm just drawing out the point that not all the augmentation is necessarily about building completely new things. It's as much sort of gently teasing away the things that we don't need. That in you know, like the old thing about, you know, the Reverend chariot wheel distance. I mean, I know it's apocryphal, but this point that there are these things that just rumble on, because at no point do we actually ask ourselves, do we actually really need this? Is this an actual constraint, or is it a cultural constraint? And do we wish to continue?
I understand that, Mark, but I think there's a really important point that you brought up, in that, as you and I strongly agree, you need to have metadata for systems to be able to interact with the data. You know, we agree on that very much. So it seems to me what you're talking about is that we need to develop more intelligent uses of metadata rather than to not write things down. One of the inventions you've made that I implemented, but it was yours, was you come across a citation in a PDF document, a number. The user can click on it and they get the relevant information and pop up. It's still, of course, stored as text, and you need the metadata to make that active. But the affordance becomes something that isn't text-based in the old-fashioned way. But yeah, let's go over to Rob and Peter. But I think, Mark, your general notion of something different is very important, because what you're saying now sounds absurd in the good sense. It is a provocation. So I really think that's very important. But we need to keep pushing to find out what we're trying to do with that. Yeah, Rob.
I just wanted to say something about interacting with this technology, because there's a dynamic tension between what we're used to doing and what the new thing is. And when the typewriter came along, I mean, you all know this, that the QWERTY keyboard was designed to slow people down because they tended to jam up the keys. So we're stuck with this stupid layout, which is totally intuitive. And we've all learned to adapt to that instead of changing the keyboard, because it would have been impossible for me to learn to type on a more sensible keyboard. So now we're going to move into something completely new. And are we going to continue using the same old technology because there's a cultural and muscle memory resistance to making that change? Or are we going to be able to create something so new that we're all starting from scratch? There's a tension there that I think we need to think about going forward.
Absolutely.
That
was a good example. I forgot about the QWERTY.
Yeah,
well, also
is probably why we need to do
be liquid, or is it going to be? I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Sorry about this weird delay. Rob, please continue. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
What the computer did was it made text liquid. It float around. We could slop glasses full in mixed drinks with text. We couldn't do that with a typewriter. We're constrained by the 8.5 by 11. We're constrained by the lines. We're constrained by the tabs and margins. So when we could start moving things around, suddenly text was fluid and no longer solid. And the Norse book you gave me used the word fossilization with text, that the old mythology got fossilized into text. So now we're sort of in a new era where things are more alive. And if we're moving into 3 dimensions, it's going to be even more alive. So I think we got to think out of the box going ahead. This is my 2 cents.
Rob, did you know, Rob, that my first piece of software was called Liquid and my first company was called the Liquid Information Company? My father, though, never really understood that because he said, with information, don't you want it to be solid? Don't you want it to be secure? And I really thought about that. So to be able to freeze and thaw, it is really, really important. And Mark and me, along with Chris at Southampton, one of the key early discussions we had was, for an academic work, there has to be an authorial voice. There has to be a linear argument to an extent, but that will come from the liquid world of the author. But of course, it's really, really important that the reader should be able to thaw that into liquid state again when reading. So that was lovely. Also, really quickly before Peter, now I've stayed with you, Rob, for a week, and I've seen Deanie's offers, and I've also seen Mark's offers. Having been in your spaces and now seeing them here, they are completely different things. I think that's something to think about. Once you have a knowledge of something, a reminder is a completely different thing. Anyway, thank you for your patience with it.
Peter.
Okay.
Peter.
I think sometimes our limitations in retrospect had advantages to them. For instance, back in my days of my 512KE Macintosh, they had those wonderful, brightly colored plastic hard 3.5-inch discs, and it was so small and so limited storage capacity that it could basically fit one project on a disk. And as a result, I knew that the red disk had the paper I'm writing. I could have that anywhere in my room, and I'd recognize that red disk and easily be able to go back to it. But when I'm dealing with a 32 gigabyte jump drive, I can plug it in. I've got every paper I've ever written anywhere, along with decades worth of backing research. I've got to spend a lot of time finding the piece of it that I'm interested in. Whereas before, that project was sitting on a discrete entity that could be moved around, and its location could be a beautiful finding aid. My office was my memory palace because I had individual artifacts that were small enough to be at the individual project level, and I could remember where I put them. And I don't have that when I'm dealing with a massive data storage unified device. We really need a way to name things, and pages turned out to be perversely important. Considering law, almost all of the cases are considered matters of public record. What became the value point that enabled West Publishing to get filthy rich and turn it into a global mega corporation? It was that they controlled the page numbers that the courts agreed would be the one set of page numbers and the one set of books that people would refer to, so that they could find the individual pieces of the cases. So even though the underlying data was free and public, the intellectual property became the pagination itself, because it allowed everyone to agree on how to find the sub-chunk of the document that actually mattered in a given context. So we really need to focus on fine-grained addressability. I loved authorship provisions in Augment. It, as I've mentioned time and time again, was my favorite one of Doug's papers. The idea of having a way to talk about where something was relative to a document, the hierarchical ID, and the idea of having a statement ID, so if something gets moved around in a liquid space, I can find that individual statement again, regardless of what context it winds up being injected into. So I think we should try to preserve those aspects.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you. Once the A team, Andrew and Adam, get things from the computer to the headset, we can start looking at more of this. And I think what you're talking about is extremely important. You can't address something if you can't address it, basically, right? Sorry, Zoom is telling me to take my hand down. So we need to then really look at the metadata for this thing that we're doing, because it'll be really annoying if we can't do what you're talking about. And I do think that PDFs still have a lot to give for that single reason. It does help with addressability. Now, should we in parallel work with the ACM to have a sidecar download of HTML or EPUB of a document? Of course we should. But these guys should hopefully relate to each other. So even if you are reading in a completely fluid environment, you should be able to know the page number, even though there are no pages. So in terms of the longevity of what we're doing, I think what you're talking about there is crucial, because otherwise you get isolated sandboxes where the structures disappear once you take the child out, to really draw on the analogy. We need to be able to fix things, and we need other people to be able to refer to things. And that means items of information in a corpus or in a document, as well as layouts, as well as processes. One of the things I loved about NLS, and Doug didn't really agree with me on this, is that you type in a command, and if you forget what the next command can be, you hit the question mark key and it'll give you all the options. But it allows you to do really long things. You can say, open this document, show it as an outline, that kind of stuff. You give it a very lengthy command, and you can even put time to it. So it becomes a cron job or a script or whatever you want, right? So these are addressable commands, so to speak. So we need to do a lot of that. And I'm very happy that Leon has taken his hand up, because he's going to talk to us about URLs now, I bet. Unmute yourself. We don't have the telepathy yet. Bill Atkinson is ahead of his time. We need your voice. Bill has been texting, by the way, during this conversation based on a photograph I sent to him. So all very weird. Yeah. You are muted again. There must be something with your keyboard or something. Completely muted.
No, it's
Now we
more
can
my
hear you.
brain, which was okay. So I think that since we're at the point, or at some point, we will be displaying text in 3D, and I just, as a small plug, want to point out the fact that once a single character, is a 3D object, we can put an href reference to it accordingly to the that is basically the XR fragment spec, also to a word. And concerning how liquid that reference will be, because there's also a liquid spectrum of references. For example, HTML links are very liquid, whereas an IPFS link will sort of never break. So there's some thinking to be done. And I was also thinking that how to say this? Yeah, what I'm actually wondering, what I don't understand, maybe you have anyone has some thoughts on this. Like, how is it possible that this whole HTML linking sort of came out of the academic world, and like all the, let's say, simple people started to use it like crazy. Everybody's linking to each other's links, breaks, etc. They're even let's say these people setting up media players which scan all their music, all their movies, and they have it like all in one big library. They have it's called Kodi, is a media player, and so they, let's say, the the people who are interested in entertainment, they all use pretty much standardized tools like Kodi or media players, but it's very interesting that the world which produced all this technology or this way of linking things is producing PDFs, and they are not so linked to each other, and there's not really a media player or a Kodi which allows you to mount a G drive here, a G drive there, another type of drive, cloud service there, and sort of scan the whole thing and make sense out of this. I hope it's not too fuzzy, this question, but yeah, I was just curious.
That's a great question. I bet you Mark Anderson has a historical account of that from all of his research, and certainly Rob can talk about it in terms of pre-web hypertext. But it was interesting, just quickly to think about this. The notion of linking was already in the air when these hypertext authoring systems were being produced, right? And so there was the ability to intertextually link one word to another in a work of electronic literature, right? And we saw this even before a lot of ELIT. Ben Schneiderman was allowing us to kind of move through a database, right? It's a database and connect through database. Rob's wonderful game, Portal, is a hypertext, right? Database hypertext. So it's just interesting how people were using it in the early days in the pre-web period, but we didn't have the ability to actually see that on a, I mean, it was Schneiderman that gave us a blue underlining of the words, right? When you look at a word and it had a blue line underneath it, it was Schneiderman that developed that for us so that we can understand what words were linked. In the hypertext system that Mark Bernstein created, it was called the Tinker Bell keys. You could hold down the Option and the Command key, and a little box would then show up around the word that was hyperlinked. And you know that you click on that word and it will take you to another word. So there was the impetus to show what was linkable, right? And then, you know, when the World Wide Web was starting to kind of take off, I taught myself how to use how to build HTML pages starting 95. And it was interesting to try to understand like how to make that link show up in a way that was useful, and what was going to be an intertextual link, and what was going to be an extra textual link. But yeah, so Mark might have also one more thing is that when we were first using these, like a web page, the web page didn't have domain names, Leon. We had to use a number. So the IP number was a long set of digits was my address. And to remember those letters, it was like way too many to remember. So I had on my computer a list of all the places I needed to link to, because I didn't have a domain name. And when domains became obviously available, then I could say, okay, newspace.net Dini, without saying 972-474-92, like dot, blah, 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 blah. Do you know what I mean? So it became not a number, but a name. So I think the first convention that happened was to start to figure out how to make things available, and then how to give them real names that were meaningful. I don't know. Does that help? Mark, there's a whole bunch of people with hands up.
Yeah, so since I actually took my hand up this time, in Doug's system, NLS Augment, one of the key things was the journal. The journal had a very, very simple versioning system. You could never delete anything. If you upload the same document again, it would be version 2 and 3 and so on. Very, very simple. One of the key benefits is that the new document then through the system would be aware of the earlier document. So you could still have a link to an earlier document that it would say, hey, there's a newer version of this. That in itself is, of course, ridiculously powerful. So in the chat just now, I just posted currently from Author, when you export a document, you have an option to automatically append in brackets the name of the author. Hi, Randall. Hi, Randall. Short time, no see. Just on the issue of all kinds of things, I'm not just briefly reviewing how Doug's journaling system worked with versioning. And I'm just showing there in the chat that there is an option in author when you export, you have the name of the document, whatever you want, and then brackets, the name of the author, the year, date, time, to make it a unique thing. It's very useful for me when I edit the Future of Text book because I don't have to keep overwriting the same title. But one thing I thought about earlier today is it might be useful if, in our community, we do something like this with whatever system so that we can refer to things. And we, when we have a new version, it's a new version. It doesn't delete the old version. And the reason I'm saying this in response to you, Leon, is my entire PhD has been about trying to leverage the positives of the web without the brittleness, trying to leverage the positive of PDF, the robustness, without the lack of interactivity. So what you're talking about here is pretty hardcore and to the point. Any questions on that before we go to Rob? Okay, Rob, please.
Peter's comments struck me because I was thinking about the early days. The first computer I had big floppy disks and a constraint on file size. And the file size became the constraint for my chapter lengths in the book I was working on then. And that was quite useful because I could fit the book on the floppy disk, and as Peter was saying, you could then find it. Now Apple has created this cloud soup, and I can't find anything unless I can remember what a word that was in the title or some way of identifying, and then going through the soup of the iCloud Drive or the iCloud itself, the whole thing that is over there somewhere. I don't know where, probably in India. And there's another dynamic tension between the constraints of the technology that give us some way of containing it, and this new open frontier where it's very easy for me, at least, to get lost. And I'm a little worried that we're going to get lost and it's going to be like a garbage truck full of data dumped on us, and we're going to have to sort of sort through it and find what's useful. I'm worried about it.
Yeah, important point. Mark?
Well, I'll pick up some of the points about that were sort of seem to be pointing slightly in my direction about some things linkage. I mean, one interesting thing, and it's sort of difficult to sort of unlearn the things we've come to know. But I mean, it is hard to think about not the web, and the web, in a way, was a slight case of Gresham's law. It wasn't hypertext, but it was cheap and it was free, and so we got the web as we have it now, which brought all sorts of limitations, because the people who were thinking and designing hypertext never thought of it in those terms. The links were stored differently. The links were two-way. You could navigate around this sort of, we call it a graph now. I don't think they necessarily did then, but it's the same, lots of things all linked up in all sorts of ways. But we are where we are, and I don't think we can undo that. An interesting thing about, I see Peter mentioned Hyper-G, and I think about Hyper-G and Microcosm and all these things, that even if they were linked, one of the things that people, I think, were bad at asking is, how does it scale? Okay, so Xanadu was going to be a worldwide system, and you can be all hand-wavy and say, well, Moore's law, something, magic, something. But I have my doubts. Hyper-G failed essentially because its method was to pass all the links around the network, and that turned out to scale not well, and especially when the web arrived and did basically roughly the same thing, not as well, but cheaper and faster. One of the things that did perhaps get lost in that was the intent and purpose of linking. Because links became a very sort of hard and fast thing with the web. You anchor something into the text, and those of us who were around at the time will remember the long and pointless debates about how you should use link anchor text and how you indicated intent and stuff. what was lost in with the bathwater was actually, in a sense, the stated intent of links. It also got badly damaged by, I can't remember which AI extinction event it was, but there was a point when everyone's terribly excited about basically doing logic across networks. And Randy Trigg, who has the dubious honor of having the first PhD in hypertext, part of his PhD was to work out all the possible link types you might ever need, which I think were 147. At which point, everyone threw their wax pencils in the air and said, "We're not doing that," and so we don't. And so, link types, although they have remanifested in things like CSS, though not deliberately, we've lost a lot there. And it's very germane, for instance, to, I think, academic discourse and citation, because one of the things that would be most useful to know is, for instance, what is a link that is merely informative as opposed to a link that is to an absolutely primary source of knowledge, of new knowledge that this document is bringing forth, and all sorts of other things. And you might also, where pertinent, you might be linking to indicate that it's an argument for or against an argument that's being made. It depends on the type of document I'm writing, but all that richness is possible now, but not helped by the tools we have. And I'll just throw in one more quick bit: the accidental prominence of PDF, because it was never meant for the purpose it has now. One of the issues that it did resolve for the local printing problem appeared to work at scale, and I do remember the massive shift that came because basically it was a US legal system basically went in hard and heavy into not just computers but PDF, and the reason was it was a fixed document of record, because at the time, I can quite imagine, it's all very well having a contractual document in Word that I can fiddle about with. Then there is no hard and fast copy. And that's sort of how we unintentionally got to where we are now. So that what won out in that race was the fixed copy of record. And it turns out that for many other things, that's exactly what we don't want. But it is where we are. Anyway, that's a bit of the back history.
Okay. The transcription bubble was over the button, so I had to click it a few times. Well, when we talk about, in order to be able to navigate anything, you need to have something to navigate by. Of course, coordinates or points of interest or whatever it is. This is why I do think it is a bit crazy that in the world we're living now, everything is somewhere else, the web. I do think that the old model of, you get yourself in the mail a paper and you read it and you have it. If it refers to another one, it can be on the desk next to you or not. That souped up, having local links, I think really, really works. And I don't have a problem with that, because if you have a written description in the olden times that goes to something that turns out to be fake, of course that can be digital too now, right? I'm sorry, I just got a message from Bruce Horn, who's not coming today. Similarly, a web link can be fake, right? So I don't understand why that's necessarily God's own truth, so to speak. So what we looked at, and Leon and I have been discussing in Slack just a little bit, is there's actually quite a lot of information you can put in a URL and in a file name. And if you have a lot of this locally, I think there are robustness and opportunities for really dealing with things. Because if you go back and try to manipulate things that may have changed, you're getting another layer of complication. Leon asked in Slack, what would be the main? Actually, Leon, do you mind speaking up the question here?
Yeah. So I the moment you mentioned this this file name format with some metadata embedded, I was a bit amazed how simple it is, and what kind of powerful implications this creates. Because if you have a little bit of metadata in the file name, it means implementation-wise, it costs nothing. Like any application can just read the contents of a directory, so it doesn't have to know anything about the file. So it does not have to support PDF files or XML files or HTML or all these. It can simply read the file name. So that was really powerful. And then I was thinking, like, wow, if you use that to sort of scan, detect, and maybe even create links, that could be very cost efficient, so to speak. You don't have to develop a lot. So then I was starting to think, what are the top 3 metadata data points in general? Probably version, the version of the file would be one of them. And B, that probably depends on the application. So in our case, what would that be then?
Peter,
Okay, I really love typed links, but I think the reason that they failed to catch on was that they weren't introduced along with some sort of a dynamic user interface affordance to allow someone to specify them without having to go and record the correct link type by memory, looking at a big giant table of all of Randy's link types. If you had maybe a 2 or 3 hop tree-like structure to allow you to drill down into which link relationship you want to indicate, and maybe have that pop up as a pie menu right over your cursor where you're doing the linking, people would have used it.
just as a brief comment on that, Peter. In Author, we have the map, and you can now assign tags for things. It turns out to be really, really difficult to assign tags beyond a few. So there's people, institutions, places. Beyond that, is it software or is it an infrastructure? Is it a method? It becomes really, really murky. And I think that mirrors different types of links beyond very, very few. So I think what you're talking about, if we do a few, it would work. But if you have the whole Randall Trigg list of links, it becomes a chore, it becomes messy, and it doesn't become useful. Just a quick thought. Mark, please.
Sorry about that. I was just reflecting on this thing about the file names. I mean, I've seen this writ large. So when I was a brief stint working for government, for the civil service, not political government, up in London in 2019, we got to the point where under the 20-year retention rules, the first digital documents were hitting the disposal to National Archive barrier. And it's a car crash. You can't read the formats. There's all you've got is something that probably is a file type extension you don't even recognize for a system that's no longer built. It's an 8.3 file name. And because everything's all the external things that you think about, so on a Windows computer, the sort of properties, all that's gone because each time it moves server, it gets damaged and lost. And at the time, the committee of non-experts, the answer was that everything had to be named in a very long, convoluted thing that started with a reverse date sort of preamble, and then a structured name thing. And that was all fine because that was in the file name, and now we have longer file names. The only bit they failed to take into account is this had to be done by humans. And humans don't, when you're writing an important document, you put that down. You don't think, right, first of all, I need to think, what is the date today in reverse date order? And it was really interesting. There was a sort of constant, so now there was a massive overhead in the system of people trying to fix a naming system that solved a technical problem, but didn't fit the use case at all. Now, and I don't know what it's gone on to become, but it does show a real problem. I mean, I think we're at the state now with the technology that we don't need to be so bound by that. And part of the problem, for instance, that I was observing 2019 is because it's a different trade. So the IT department didn't want people who wrote documents putting metadata into the documents. But that's the technical low-hanging fruit. And it was all to do with basically different tribes not talking to one another and not being in the same meetings. And any attempt I made to try and improve that fell on strictly deaf ears. But there we go. But I mean, it is, this thing of metadata is also problematic because it's both an affordance, a sort of a thing we do, and almost a philosophical thing. And a thing I think that I'm seeing this in a couple of projects I'm doing at the moment, is the number of people in the room at any one time who really understand both those aspects of metadata is close to vanishing point. And that's not a judgment on the people, but it's an undiagnosed and untreated problem, because you need to have a sense of both in order to build systems that will use something. Because most of us interact with metadata in terms of systems we're part of. It's a thing we're told to do that it seems like a somebody else job, that we get no immediate benefit from, apart from the fact that if we're in the system long enough, we find out why we're supposed to have done it, because we can't find anything, because lo and behold, we put no metadata in. So yeah, it is a problem, and file names are a sort of a help, but come with their own problems. But again, it goes back to the fact that building, it's a bit like I see people keep every day. There's somebody else who's come up with a wonderful system that is going to build a network graph of an argument, which will cause the other party to immediately agree. Well, it doesn't work, because that's not how humans roll. You know, we have animus. We don't just have logic. Anyway, I'll shut up now.
Shaking hands vigorously on that point. Leon. Oh, Leon, you're muting yourself, but
Sorry,
I just
yeah,
wanted
I
to
did it
highlight.
again.
No, that's okay. I just want to say, Brandel, please read what Dini said at the end there, because you talked about this on Friday. So after Leon, if you could please comment on the different methods of computer history, so to speak, that would be very useful to this, I think, if you don't mind. Okay, Leon, please.
Yeah, so yeah, this also brings me to something I've discussed many times with Mark and with Frode, is the question, what do we want to get out of a document? And what I find very strange, and what I don't really understand, is that in certain areas, certain problems are collectively solved in a very good way. For example, if you look at the Unix system and permissions, then this is basically very well solved metadata supported by all the file systems. So you have a lot of flavors of file systems, and all of them support different file permissions. So this is great. You would expect that this would also apply to document metadata. Like, I would expect that in a different reality, we basically would be able to save a PDF in Author, in Frode's Author, which would then save the visual meta as a file, just like a file permission, but then just file metadata. It would basically be a tag system. It would add the tag visual meta, and with the value, the visual meta. And so I'm not really sure, why isn't this implemented on a file system level, because that's where you would expect sort of like free-form tags or free-form metadata to be supported. So this is a bit of a mystery to me. Hold on, I have to open the door.
Okay. Brandel, is it okay if I just comment briefly on that before you go into the really cool thing
sure.
about the day? Okay, thank you. Just waiting for Leon to open the door in this real world portal door. Right, okay. Yeah, just to comment on that. First of all, The tags on macOS are an absolute mess. They could have been so useful, but for a piece of software to be able to write them is just not that feasible. It's weird. So that's one issue. The other issue is I own Author, meaning we as a community own Author. I know you're not all Mac people, but we can change things. If you want to experiment with something like this, we can do that. And then we can see if it's useful in other systems. So please, totally feel free to come up with this kind of discussion of how can we use the file name of a document. Anyone know that the maximum length of a file name now? They're quite long, aren't they? Potentially. Not like in
We
the
try
old
not to
days.
go over 28. We try not to go over 28 characters.
Okay. Right. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that. So Brandel, yes. Oh,
Did you want me to say the control theory batch processing dichotomy? Yeah, so computers per se, like computing is not one discipline, but two disciplines more or less split right down the middle. From the very beginning of computing, and its sort of nominal origin as being punch card computing, it's always been in service of batch processing, this idea that you get some expensive important thing and you set it to task and you check on it when it's done and you use those results for some kind of important thing. And you can see the pedigree of that all the way through, and it can be easy to forget that actually computing has also always done another thing, which is provide real-time guidance, sometimes literally in the form of things like missile guidance, but for rough and ready answers right now that are related to the exact things that somebody needs right now. And it really doesn't matter if it gets it better in 24 hours. What's important is the relevance and the immediacy of it. And yeah, they both have, very important sort of implications for the military and everybody else. But yeah, I understand. I sort of take those to be control theory and data processing, batch processing. And I kind of see Google as being the apotheosis of batch processing, whereas in many regards, Apple is much more of a control theory company in the sense that it's making these smaller things much closer to hand, often literally on hand. And that what's more important than the perfection of the results is that you have them based on the terms that you input at the time that you do so. Yeah, it's one of those things in the same way that people talk about English, and the dichotomy is kind of running right the way through it. Computing has its own. It's remarkable how little it's commented on, but one that I like a distinction that I find really, really fruitful to be able to understand.
It's interesting that, I mean, I think, I'm thinking back to the time I was looking at sort of document retention stuff I spoke about earlier, and, people were trying to do this thing of prompts. It's another what it shows us about, it's another problem about everything works until you give it to human beings. So turns out that they're not very good about knowing what they want to record, and so part of the problem is you now have two problems, because you've got to train the people, and we don't want to give the time to people, and more annoying, the sort of cleverer and sort of older and more trained people are, the less they are minded to be trained in anything at any time, because they know how to do stuff. So why should they waste their valuable time doing these things? And so it's remarkably difficult. I mean, I do think we don't make enough. We haven't bothered to experiment enough with the sort of prompts that Brandel was alluding to. The system can have a good guess at what you meant as a starting point, but interestingly, it seems that we don't want to be told what to do. We both want to decide, but actually we'd rather basically decide at another time, and preferably actually somebody else to decide on our behalf, because we've got more important things to do. And when you mesh that together, it sort of explains why we have the mess we do. But like so many things, it's as much a social engineering problem as it is actually a technical one. Fred.
So I have a question for everyone, and it goes back to dog fooding, and it goes a little bit relevant to Sloan, but also here in general. How do we now want to carry on our own discussion? And I'm not talking about procedures. All I'm talking about is the actual how and where do we note things down, and how and where can we find out what the up-to-date thing is? The reason I'm asking is not necessarily for an in-depth discussion on this, but there is a difference between, for instance, updating the website and putting things there versus sending documents around or having things in Slack. Now that we talked around these issues here in general, are there any thoughts on how this should apply to us?
We need naming conventions. And that's one of the things you and I are going to work out this week in our onboarding. We need to have set naming conventions and file structures for everything we do. And Andrew's going to be able to work with us on this. I'm sure Adam's going to need to weigh in on it as well, because the kind of conventions they need might skirt beyond what a file name for a Word doc is or a PDF. So, for example, in our lab, we don't use underscores at all unless someone's using, a game engine, because they need underscores for Unreal Engine. So, and we obviously don't use underscores because it's hard to see underscores if something has a hyperlink, right? So there's some of that data some of that activity will happen this week, Froda. And I don't think you and I should make the final decision. I think we should come up with a draft and share it with everybody else, right? I mean, everything we do this week in our onboarding will be shared with the team at large so that they can weigh in and make sure we haven't missed anything. Does that make sense to everybody? And know that we make these naming convention guide sheets all the time for every project we do. And there's some ideas that we carry forward that becomes just like, okay, so when we're working with an image, this is what we need to do. But every project is different and has its own set of constraints and affordances. So you and I will work that out this week.
Yeah, that'll absolutely be an important aspect of this. But, we use Basecamp now, and I'm not that impressed with Basecamp because it's a little difficult to find things. Things just go up in what folder. There's a folder called Documents, which is, of course, not as useful as it could be. But I kind of want us to have a couple of tracks of where we note down things we've decided, and also weird stuff like Alan was talking about, kind of the magic stuff. But the question is where. At the end of the year, hopefully a lot of this will end up in our book. So it really should be in a method through which us working on the book will have access to it. But so the question to the group now is also partly, if you have a thought and it is something that you want to be able to have referred to in the future, how do you want to give it to the group? Is Slack where you want to put it? I know we talked about it before. I'm just getting a pulse again. You want to do a document, a web page, or what? Peter, please start. But also, if you want to put something in the chat on this, along with speaking, that's cool. But yeah, Peter.
Well, I could see injecting something in more than one medium, depending upon what I'm using at the time. I might be working in Slack and get the idea and want to put in Slack. It might come to me when I'm in here, and I might want to put it in the meeting sidebar. Also, sort of stepping back to the bigger picture, do we have a development server somewhere, and do we have a sense of what the software configuration available is going to be? For instance, the hosting service I use for my website is still running Node at version 14.21.2. The current version is up in the 20s. So are we going to be picking a standardized programming language to be using? Do we have the option of going with exotic languages as long as they can compile to a target CPU architecture of whatever our experimental deployment server is going to look like? So the more information along those lines we get, the easier it'll be to replicate the test bed environment on our local machines so that we can be working offline, get something going as a local sub-project, and then upload it and merge it with the group things on a worldwide accessible server. So that's just sort of what's going through my head at the moment.
I'm going to let Brandel say what he wants to say on this topic, but then we'll come back to this, particularly with comments from Andrew. I've written something in the chat. Yeah, so Brandel, please.
I was going to say, I'm afraid, as I said at dinner, I'm a nihilist, so I'm happy to share with the group on a bar napkin, or just a whisper that most people didn't even get, and everybody will forget by the end of the night. Because I think that the process of doing the sharing is more important than the content that we tend to share, and I'm confident that by just doing more of it, that we'll end up with something really interesting. But I also think that more seriously, for more explicit and formal contributions, I think Slack is a good start. But I tend to shy away from formalism of lodging things or adding things, and I struggle with the bug tracking systems of various kinds that people have, because I don't mean it exactly like that, and I prefer to lean on the informality of the other channels that are available to us. So I guess that probably means that my input isn't that helpful here.
Well, there is a very different thing, like the symposium is one thing, the book is another thing. Our meetings are one thing, but okay, all right, fair enough. But Andrew, are you there? Can you hear us? And you have further comments for Peter along the lines of what he discussed?
Yeah, I am here. I had to kill my camera because I kept dropping out of the meeting. Unsure what's going on today. Not like an in-depth response for you, Peter, but I have like a rough summary. You're asking about programming languages and the frameworks and whatnot. We're definitely focusing on open web languages, so HTML and JavaScript as the core there. But I am using Node to import Three.js. So I know Node allows some additional stuff on top, but mostly in the sense of modules. I'm unsure exactly what Three.js uses beyond JavaScript, so it might technically have some other languages mixed in. I'm not sure since I'm fairly new to Three.js. I see Brandel nodding, so maybe for sure.
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
It's got GLSL and has dribs and drabs of WebAssembly available to do various bits, particularly in things like Troika and PDF.js. So you can write some stuff in C, but in large part, I haven't had to modify any WASM before. I've gotten down and dirty into all of the GLSL, but if you've written shader stuff, then it shouldn't come as a surprise, the formulation and presentation.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, so I guess that would be more the summary.
So what version of
Beanie and I hang on, Peter. Beanie and I have to go. I'll let you ask that question, but first, Peter, a question for you. What kind of a headset will you be using? Have you decided?
I haven't decided yet.
Okay, because it's going to be difficult to code without being in the code, so to speak. So I look forward to that decision. Yeah, Peter, please repeat your question. I'm sorry for cutting you off.
Yeah, I'm just asking what version of Node.js are you using, Andrew? And any information?
Yeah, I grabbed the latest. I don't have my dev stuff in front of me, so I don't remember what version that is. It's just the latest right now.
Okay, latest. That's good enough for me. Yeah. Okay, that's where I'll work.
Okay, thank you guys for today, and see those who can on Wednesday. Bye all. Bye from signing off from Washington.